It is the 854th year of the Second Era, and across Cyrodiil, the common folk breathe a sigh of relief. The chaos of the long interregnum was over, the land had been united, and in the Temple of the One, the dragon fires had been relit. All is as it should be. Atop the ruby throne, a man with dark hair, bright blue eyes and a weathered face watches the sun rise over Lake Rumer with an ambitious gleam in his eyes. Welcome to the Wizards and Warriors' second video on the world of the Elder Scrolls. In our last video, we covered the ancient history of Tamriel, leading up to the imperial coronation of Tiber Septim. In this episode, we will take you on a whirlwind of battles as Tiber conquers his way through Tamriel before ultimately ascending to godhood. Alongside Tiber's drama, others seemed content to live by the ancient tradition of humanity, hunting, and now you can too with our sponsor, Hunting Clash. Get this free Android and iOS game via our link in the description and use code HUNTWITHWIZARDS for a $15 gift package. Hunting Clash brings the wilderness into your home with worldwide locations to travel to, from Montana to Namibia to Kamchatka, each with its own selection of wild animals to discover and hunt, dozens in total. Some hunts are quite dangerous though, so you'll need to upgrade your weapons and train a loyal hunting dog to help you out. Pulling off difficult hunts grants you upgraded skills to help in your ongoing competition with other hunters. You can have hunting duels with players from around the world, plus there are weekly competitions and events to hone your shooting, from forests to savanna, from wild goats to grizzly bears. All this with the most realistic graphics yet seen in a mobile game. And when you use our code HUNTWITHWIZARDS, you'll get 100 gold, 70 skill tokens and 2 mythical lure cards, all for free, usually costing $15. Go to the menu in the top right, hit gift codes and enter HUNTWITHWIZARDS here. Support our channel by downloading the game now. The tale of how the Dragon of the North united men, elves and beast folk has been told a dozen ways, with each version possessing extraneous details that directly contradict the others. As such, the story we are about to present to you is merely our interpretation of events, based on the two most substantial yet contradicting records of the Tiber Wars, the official imperial narrative, published by the Pocket Guide to the Empire, and the controversial Arcturian heresy. We should begin with a brief introduction to two men who would be critical in helping Stormcrown fulfill his expansionist ambitions. First was Ysmir Wulfharth. Wulfharth was an ancient High King of Skyrim, reigning thousands of years before the First Age of Talos Stormcrown. If legend is to be believed, Wulfharth met his end in a duel with the death god Orki, hyper-aging himself to expiry while using his Thu to reverse a curse which had reverted Skyrim's people into childhood. But time and again, allegedly through the will of the Nordic creator god Sjor, his ashes would re-manifest into living form, effectively making him immortal. Throughout the First Era, this Ash King would develop a searing hatred for the elves of Morrowind, whose leaders had stolen the heart of his beloved Sjor and defiled it by drawing from its power to turn themselves into gods. Throughout many resurrections he tried to vanquish them, but time and again the Chimmer and later their Dunmer descendants blasted him back into ash. In the late Second Era, the Ash King reincarnated once more and attached his cause to Talos. As per the prophecy of the Greybeards, it would be Stormcrown who would finally unite Tamriel and defeat the elves. Beyond Wulfharth, Talos had another key lieutenant, the brilliant sorcerer Zurin Arctus, who by some accounts was one of the most powerful magic users in Tamrielic history. Different stories explain Zurin's massive arcane powers in different ways, the most popular of which claim he was a reincarnation of Magnus, the father god of magic. In any case, Zurin had served Talos since he was a mere general in Culhakane's employ, and upon his crowning as Emperor Tiber Septim, became his chief battle mage. It is here that we continue from where we left off last episode. In the 854th year of the Second Era, the Never Emperor Culhakane was assassinated, and in his place, Talos, known now by his Cyrodiilic name of Tiber Septim, relit the ancient dragonfires of Alessia and Remen and declared himself first emperor of the Third Empire of Tamriel. But there was still much to do, for while Cyrodiil and the Reachlands were now his, the rest of the continent remained yet unconquered. The remaining independent human kingdoms would be the first dominoes to fall. Skyrim swore fealty to Tiber with little resistance. After all, he had grown up there, and the Jarls saw him as one of their own. No doubt Ash King Wulfharth, the Tongue of Shore, also had an influence in the integration of his erstwhile realm into the Third Empire. High Rock was soon to follow. The Bretons had long been divided into a patchwork of petty feudal kingdoms, which made them all the easier for the united forces of Skyrim and Cyrodiil to steamroll through. Ironically, the Nords and Bretons, whose plans to conquer Cyrodiil had been foiled by Tiber at Sancre-Tor, were now ruled by an emperor who had been raised by Nords and probably was born a Breton. After these conquests, only one human realm remained outside the Third Empire. Indeed, the Imperials were about to clash headlong against the warriors from Hammerfell and their curved swords. The late Second Era had actually been an era of unprecedented peace for the Redguards. The threat of the growing Third Empire on their eastern border had compelled the kingdom's two feuding factions, the Crowns and Forebears, to unite under the rule of High King Thasad II, who himself was a crown, but was evidently moderate enough to keep peace between both sides. However, when Thasad died in Second Era 862, and was replaced by his more radically pro-crown son, Prince Ator, old rivalries resurfaced and civil war quickly engulfed the Alikir once more. Tiber's window into the Redguard realm came when Baron Volag, the leader of the Forebears, sent ambassadors to plead with the Emperor for help in their struggle. Volag was losing ground to the Crowns and had finally grown desperate enough to make a deal with the proverbial devil on their doorstep, promising Tiber fealty to the Third Empire in exchange for help in vanquishing their ancient crown enemies. The Emperor wasted no time accepting this offer, and within the year, the full might of the Imperial legions had been brought to bear upon Hammerfell, pushing the forces of the Crowns to the sea. Prince Ator put up a fiery resistance, but he was simply too far outnumbered, and before long retreated with what remained of his navy to the last Crown stronghold, the island of Strossum Kai. In Second Era 864, Stormcrown appointed his finest naval commander, Admiral Amiel Richten, to dislodge this last wedge of native resistance. Thus the Imperial New West Navy, Pride of Colovia, sailed to Strossum Kai, where they encountered the Royal Navy of Hammerfell, led by Prince Ator himself, in the open waters just beyond the harbour of Port Hunding. Accounts on the composition of the opposing forces are sparse, but it would not be unreasonable to assume that the Imperial ships outnumbered the Crowns by a significant margin. Nevertheless, Prince Ator was no coward, and immediately signalled his fleet to draw up into a battle line and engage their foe. We can assume that the Redguards used their sleek vessels to dance around Imperial warships, relying on lightning boarding tactics as they leapt from one deck to another, engaging in brutal melees as Imperial battle mages and archers flung fire and arrows in a vain attempt to prevent their landings. In the thick of it all was the Redguard Prince, ferrying his flagship to fight wherever the battle was most intense. These were conditions unfavourable to standard Imperial battle conventions. As the War Manual of Zurin Arctus states, a close-fought battle is to be avoided. The fortunes of war may turn aside the most powerful sorcery, and courage may undo the best-laid plans. Thus, one can imagine that the fast-paced and up-close ferocity of the Ragada warrior wave kept the Empire's marines on the perpetual back foot. Despite his numerical advantage, Richten saw the tide of battle slowly turning against him. But the Imperial Admiral had one card left up his sleeve, a secret weapon, one he had been reluctant to use, but now had no choice but to do so. In the age before recorded history, dragons had ruled the men of the North, but when men had learned to shout as dragons do, their supremacy had been overthrown. Then, in the Second Era, when the Snake Men of Akavir came, They slaughtered nearly all the Dova, leaving very few remaining on Tamriel. Proud and arrogant immortal beings, it is in a dragon's nature to seek to dominate mortals, but as their numbers dwindled, a select few made the fateful decision to submit and serve the race of men. So it was that on that fateful day of Second Era 854, a pair of red wings blot out the sun over Hunding Bay. Nafalar the Red, loyal soldier of Tiber Septim, had been ordered into the fray. Knowing that a torrent of dragonfire could easily annihilate his fleet, Prince Ator signalled his ships to pull back, scatter, and concentrate their ranged weapons upon Nafalar. But it was at that fateful moment that a poisoned arrow, loosed by a renegade Dunmer assassin wielding the legendary Daedric Bow of Shadows, found the prince's flesh. Ator's archmage, Voa, was able to preserve the dying prince's soul in a soul gem, but moments later, a stream of dragon flame sunk the Red Guard flagship to the bottom of the sea. Using the confusion caused by the death of the Crown Commander, the dragon attacked the fleet relentlessly, making them hastily retreat towards the harbour of Strossum Kai in the Hunding Bay. Most of the troops disembarked at the well-fortified Old Quarter, hoping its high walls would protect them. In response, Rickton simply ordered Nafalar to burn down the entire section of the city with all the crowns inside, leaving no survivors. The Battle of Hunding Bay was a decisive victory for the Imperials, and with the final bastion of Crown resistance broken, Hammerfell was fully annexed into the Third Empire. Rather than give power to the forebears as had been promised, Emperor Tiber instead decided to appoint Cyrodiilic governors throughout the province, with Admiral Rickton in overall regional command. The proud Red Guards chafed under direct foreign rule, and soon a province-wide revolt had broke out. This ended in success for the rebels when the renegade Red Guard hero Cyrus slew Nafalar and severely weakened Imperial control in the region. As a result, the Empire was forced to sign the Treaty of Strossum Kai. Hammerfell would remain a part of the Empire, but with significant internal autonomy for both crowns and forebears, who would continue to bicker amongst themselves under Imperial suzerainty. In any case, Tiber Septim had done what a century ago seemed impossible, and united all the human nations of Tamriel under his banner. Following the annexation of Hammerfell, the rest of unconquered Tamriel was made up of non-human lands, whose native populations lived in ashy wastes, primordial woodlands, jungles, deserts or swamps, all territory that could not be conquered conventionally. This forced Tiber to think outside the box. Generally speaking, he employed a tactic where his armies would blitzkrieg over a border, win some quick victories, then offer an armistice where the native population would be offered autonomy of culture, faith and self-rule in return for allegiance to the Dragon Crown. This prevented the need for Imperial legions to engage in long, protracted campaigns in otherwise untamable lands. This was likely what occurred in the Khajiiti homeland of Elsewhere. When Imperial forces initially crossed into the Catlands, they conquered parts of the historical northern region of Aniquina and cast out all the native Khajiit there. After the city of Senchal refused to surrender to Imperial General Potreed, Cyrodiilic forces stormed its walls and massacred every man, woman and cub inside. This slaughter would later be omitted from the Empire's official histories. In any case, Elsewhere was soon after assimilated into the Third Empire. To prevent a perpetual guerrilla war, the catfolk were placated by being allowed to retain their customs, with their traditional spiritual leader, the Mane, retaining temporal authority over them. Things would play out slightly differently with the lizard folk. Rare was the man who would walk willingly into Blackmarsh. Only a few generations had passed since the Nahatan plague had spread out of that region, while the Argonians themselves were hostile to all outsiders, able to strike effortlessly like shadows. Even Tiber saw the futility of trying to fully subdue such an alien land, so he contented himself with just conquering its outer coastlines, and when the Argonian resistance retreated into the swampy heart of their province, the Imperials dared not follow, knowing only disease and death awaited them, with little to gain in return. With that said, the Empire now considered all beastfolk lands to be officially subdued, and so Tiber looked to his next conquest, and his gaze fell to the east, to Morrowind. Always had the Dark Elves of Restane resisted the conquests of men. The Ash King Wulfharth was Tiber's active reminder of this. In the late Second Era, Morrowind was ruled by Almalexia, Sothosil and Vivec, the same tribunal of living gods that had presided over the Dunmer for millennia. The soldiers of Cyrodiil dreaded an invasion of Morrowind. In their eyes, nothing lay east but a land of barren ash, peopled by demon-eyed fanatics. If the Arcturian heresy is to be believed, then even Stormcrown himself was reluctant to provoke the Dark Elves, and had to be constantly pressured by the Ash King, who was desperate to finally vanquish his ancient foes. Ultimately, Tiber was swayed, likely due to the rich ebony deposits in the region. Thus, an invasion fleet was amassed along the northern coast of Skyrim, while the Imperial legions massed along northeastern Cyrodiil. Soon, Imperial legions advanced into Morrowind, meeting with dogged resistance the whole way. Nevertheless, the soldiers of the Dragon Banner were able to push through to the capital of Mournhold, sacking the city. Seeing where the wind was blowing, Vivec, the warrior poet of the tribunal, agreed to treat with the Emperor, and an arrangement was struck. Morrowind would join the Empire, but as a fully autonomous province, with all rights of faith and self-government. This arrangement allowed Tiber to avoid the catastrophic losses that would certainly result otherwise. But there was a cost. For now, the Emperor had to deal with the wrath of his immortal Ash King, who was furious that the tribunal would not be destroyed. Feeling betrayed that the man prophesied to vanquish the heretical elves instead collaborated with them, Wulfharth abandoned the Septim cause. A setback to be sure, but the loss of Wulfharth was a small price to pay, for peace with the tribunal had yielded the Emperor something far more valuable, the big walker Numidium. The Numidium was a massive skyscraper-sized metal golem, originally made by the hyper-advanced Dwemer in their vain quest to create a new god, powered by the heart of Lorkhan, that would help them transcend the mortal plane. It was precisely this ill-fated attempt to achieve divinity that caused the Dwemer to vanish from Nurn. After the disappearance of its creators, the Numidium came into the possession of the Dunmer Tribunal, who in turn gave it as a peace offering to Tiber Septim. After all, what harm could it do? Lorkhan's heart was safely guarded under Red Mountain, and without it, Numidium was but a brass shell with no soul. By now, the only remaining nucleus of resistance against the Septim Empire on Tamriel was the Altmeri Dominion, a political union between the Bosmer of Valenwood and the Altmer of Alinor. Prior to the rise of Talos, the Dominion had been the most powerful state in Tamriel, but now the continent was polarized between them and the Third Empire. Indeed, elsewhere had been a Dominion client state before its annexation into the Empire. Suffice to say, tensions were sky high, and total war between men and Mer was inevitable. Armed conflict began in the Second Era 887, and would rage on for 9 years. The Imperial legions advanced into Valenwood, and between its extremely dense primeval forests and savage cannibalistic Bosmer natives, we can assume the campaign was no holiday. Imperial troops were able to push deep into Ifra's domain, but the Wood Elves, no doubt with High Elf aid, made the invaders pay for every inch with a pound of blood. Nevertheless, the Empire was soon again in a position to make the usual offer, religious and cultural freedom in exchange for submission. Valenwood henceforth became a province of the Empire, while maintaining a king from its ancient Camoran dynasty as a figurehead, and limited internal rule through a council of tribal chieftains. If the subjugation of the Wood Elves had been grueling, following up with the High Elves would be nigh on impossible. The Altmer homeland was an island stronghold, protected not only by a royal navy that far outclassed its imperial counterpart, but by Tamriel's most powerful sorcerers, wielding dawn magics barely comprehensible to the average human mage. Trying to land an army in Alinor was clearly a futile endeavour. That is, until Zurin Arctus approached Tiber with fateful news: Numidium was finished. Long had the Imperial battle mage laboured over the pieces of the god robot, meticulously assembling the Colossus back together. Now the question was how to activate it. Numidium was originally meant to be powered by the heart of Lorkhan. How could one find a substitute for the heart of a god? Two stories tell different versions of what happened next. In the first, Zurin willingly sacrificed himself on Tiber's behalf, pouring his life force into a massive soul gem. In the second, Zurin and Tiber convinced Wulfharth Ashking to return, on the promise they would destroy the Morrowind Tribunal together, but this turned out to be a trap, and instead, Wulfharth was ambushed, trapped, and his soul siphoned. Either way, the result was the same: the Mantella, a massive gem powered either by the essence of a mage with the soul of Magnus or an immortal king with the soul of Shor. With the Mantella, Tiber Septim was able to activate Numidium, and in the 896th year of the Second Era, a titan of cold brass blotted out the sun over the crystalline towers of Alinor. It is not known how exactly Tiber used the Numidium on the High Elves, only that he used it well. Utter devastation was wrought upon the Altmere, as the very fabric of time and space was sundered upon their sacred isle, causing chronological aftershocks which still impact the land to this day. The invasion of Alinor lasted an eternity and lasted an hour. Afterwards, the islands were annexed into the Empire. The Tiber Wars were over, for the dragon banner of the Third Empire now flew proudly over every nation and race of Tamriel. After the unification of Tamriel, the Second Era ended and the Third Era began. For the next 4 decades, the Dragon of the North reigned over a golden age of peace and prosperity in the land of Dawn's beauty. At least that is what the Imperial records would have us believe. In the 38th year of the Third Era, the man who had been born as Hergelti, raised as Talos, and crowned as Tiber Septim passed away. So powerful was the spirit of this most extraordinary man that when he shared his mortal form, he achieved apotheosis, godhood. Since the days of Alessia, the Imperials had worshipped a pantheon of 8 Adric deities. In death, Tiber Septim became the 9th, reborn as Talos, the god of war and governance. Meanwhile, the High Elves, believing themselves to be the descendants of the Aedra and their mortality a curse, looked on in horror as a member of their oldest rival, the race of men, achieved the divinity they so coveted. But all they could do for now was harbour their resentment. For now. As a mortal ruler, Tiber Septim was gone, but the empire he had built certainly was not. In our next episode in our series on the history of the Elder Scrolls world, we will watch the united Tamriel he built be pushed to its limits as his descendant, Uriel V, expands the ambitions of imperial conquest beyond the horizon of Tamriel to the land of tigers, snakes and dragons. The invasion of Akavir is coming up next. And once again, thanks to Hunting Clash for sponsoring this video. Get the game via the link in the description and use code HUNTWITHWIZARDS to get $15 worth of items. We may not have the heart of Lorkhan, but we can still plan on transcending the boundaries of space and time by covering the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes. So please subscribe and press that bell button. Please consider liking and sharing as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.